The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, just like it had every spring for the past 8 years. My mother's voice carried that familiar tone of practiced disappointment as she delivered the same message she'd given me since my daughters were born. Scott, I've been thinking about the beach house this summer, and with Patricia's family already booked for their usual weeks, there just isn't room for your girls. You understand, don't you? The cottage is only 3 bedrooms, and the boys need their space. In the background, I could hear my sister Patricia laughing at something, her voice cutting through the speaker, as she added, maybe if Scott stopped playing with computers and earned real money, he could afford his own vacation. The line went quiet for a moment before Mom's voice returned softer, but no less final. Family priorities, Scott. I'm sure you understand. As I hung up, 8-year-old Emma and Sophie looked up from their homework, asking why Grandma never wanted them around. The rejection letter from the venture capital firm sat on my desk, and suddenly, everything crystallized with perfect clarity. This wasn't the first time I'd heard those words, and as I stared at my daughters' confused faces, the full weight of 8 years of systematic exclusion hit me like a freight train. It started right after my divorce from Jennifer 3 years ago, when suddenly the family dynamic shifted in ways I never saw coming. My mother, Dorothy, owned a modest 3-bedroom beach cottage in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, a property she'd inherited from my grandmother 20 years earlier. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple house with weathered shingles and a small deck overlooking the dunes. But it had been the gathering place for our family every summer since I was a kid. My sister Patricia, a corporate lawyer married to Marcus, a successful cardiologist, had somehow managed to monopolize every prime summer week for the past 8 years. Their teenage sons Tyler and Brandon, now 15 and 17, had grown up treating the beach house like their personal summer camp, while my twin daughters had never spent a single night there. Patricia's reasoning was always the same. Her boys were older, they needed space for friends, and my work as a software consultant was too unstable to plan family vacations around. That last part stung the most, because it couldn't have been further from the truth. I'd built a solid freelance consulting business, specializing in enterprise software solutions, earning enough to provide a comfortable middle-class life for Emma and Sophie. Sure, my income fluctuated seasonally, but I'd never missed a child support payment or failed to cover their expenses. Yet somehow, in my family's eyes, I was the unreliable one, the one whose career was dismissed as playing with computers, while Patricia's legal work was treated with reverence. The breaking point came 3 weeks after that phone call, during what was supposed to be a casual coffee meeting with Patricia at a downtown cafe. She'd suggested we catch up, something we rarely did unless she needed something or wanted to coordinate family logistics. I should have known something was off when she spent the first 10 minutes bragging about her latest corporate merger case and the vacation home Marcus was considering buying in the Outer Banks. It's all about building generational wealth, she said, stirring her latte with the kind of self-satisfied expression that had defined our relationship since childhood. Mom's cottage is charming, but it's really more suitable for kids than adults. Tyler and Brandon are at the age where they can appreciate a real beach experience. I was about to respond when her phone buzzed on the table between us. The screen lit up with a WhatsApp notification, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The group chat was called Beach Planning Squad, and from the preview, I could see messages from my mother, Patricia Marcus, and even my ex-wife, Jennifer. I wasn't in this group. I hadn't even known it existed. Patricia quickly grabbed her phone, but not before I caught a glimpse of several recent messages. Mom, make sure Scott doesn't ask about July again. The twins are too messy for the good furniture. Scott's going through his midlife crisis phase, probably better to keep things stable for now. The most painful message, the one that burned itself into my memory, was from my own mother. Patricia's boys deserve a stable family vacation. Scott needs to focus on providing better for his girls, instead of expecting handouts from family. I sat there in stunned silence, processing the full scope of what I'd just discovered. This wasn't about space constraints or booking conflicts. This was a coordinated effort to keep my family out, a deliberate strategy that had been running for nearly a decade. Every polite rejection, Every gentle explanation about limited room, every suggestion that I should understand the complexity of family scheduling had been orchestrated lies. Patricia noticed my expression and followed my gaze to her phone. For just a moment, her confident mask slipped, and I saw something like guilt flash across her face. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by her usual dismissive smile. "Family group chats, you know how it is," she said, tucking the phone into her purse. "Lots of moving parts to coordinate." "Moving parts," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you call deliberately excluding my children from their own family?" She had the audacity to look offended. "It's not personal, Scott. We're just trying to make sure everyone has the best possible experience. The cottage is small, and honestly, your situation has been so unstable since the divorce. We didn't want to make assumptions about your availability." I stood up from the table, my coffee untouched and growing cold. "My situation," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "You mean my successful business and my healthy relationship with my daughters?" Patricia's response was a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Successful, Scott. You're a freelance computer programmer. That's not a career. It's a hobby that pays bills sometimes. When you're ready to have a real conversation about building something substantial, we can talk about family vacations." I walked out of that cafe with Patricia's words echoing in my ears, but more importantly, with absolute clarity about what I needed to do. That evening, as Emma and Sophie asked me again why they never got to visit the beach house like their cousins, I made them a promise I had no idea how I'd keep. "Things are going to change," I told them, pulling them close on our living room couch. "Next summer, you're going to have the best beach vacation of your lives." They looked at me with the kind of trust that only children can give, and I knew I couldn't let them down. I just had no idea how I was going to make it happen. 3 weeks later, I was working late in my home office debugging a particularly complex integration project for a client's inventory management system when an email notification chimed on my laptop. It was nearly midnight, and I almost ignored it, assuming it was another automated marketing message or client update that could wait until morning. But something about the sender's name made me pause. David Chen, senior software engineer at Google. David and I had been roommates at Carnegie Mellon 15 years ago, back when we were both convinced we'd change the world through code. After graduation, he'd taken the traditional Silicon Valley path, landing at Google straight out of college, and climbing the corporate ladder with impressive speed. Meanwhile, I'd chosen the entrepreneurial route, starting several small tech companies that ranged from modest successes to spectacular failures, eventually settling into consulting when life became more complicated after marriage and kids. We'd stayed in touch sporadically over the years, exchanging LinkedIn messages on birthdays and the occasional industry article share, but we hadn't had a real conversation in probably 3 years. So when I opened his email, I expected some kind of casual catch-up, or maybe a job referral. Instead, I found something that would change everything. "Scott." The email began, "I hope this finds you well. I'm reaching out because Google's new acquisition team has been combing through public code repositories, looking for innovative solutions to problems we're working on internally. They found something interesting on your GitHub account." My heart started beating faster as I continued reading. "Do you remember that family scheduling app you built a few years back? Family Sync. The one where you created that elegant solution for coordinating complex family logistics across multiple households. Our internal family services platform has been struggling with exactly those problems for months. The algorithm you wrote for optimizing schedule conflicts while maintaining individual preferences is brilliant, and frankly, it's about 3 years ahead of anything our teams have developed." I did remember Family Sync. I'd built it during the worst part of my divorce proceedings, when coordinating custody schedules, school events, and family obligations had become an overwhelming nightmare of conflicting calendars and missed communications. The app had started as a personal solution to my own chaos, but I'd refined it into something genuinely innovative, a system that could manage multiple family units with complex overlapping schedules, while learning from user preferences to optimize outcomes over time. I'd put it on GitHub as an open-source project, figuring other divorced parents might benefit from the tools that had saved my sanity. But I'd never marketed it commercially, never tried to monetize it, never even thought of it as anything more than a personal project that happened to solve a real problem. David's email continued. Google wants to acquire the intellectual property rights for Family Sync and hire you as a consulting architect to help integrate your approach into our platform. I know this might sound too good to be true, but the acquisition team is prepared to offer $12 million for the IP, plus a 2-year consulting contract worth an additional $2 million annually. I read that number 3 times before it started to feel real. $12 million. For code I'd written during sleepless nights while Emma and Sophie slept in the next room, desperately trying to create some order in the chaos of our new single-parent life. My first instinct was to assume it was an elaborate scam. People didn't just stumble across random GitHub repositories and offer life-changing money for them. But when I looked closer at the email headers and David's contact information, everything checked out. The email came from his verified Google account, and when I cross-referenced his LinkedIn profile, everything matched what I remembered about his career trajectory. I called the number he'd included in his signature, even though it was past midnight on the East Coast. David answered on the second ring. Scott, I was hoping you'd call tonight. I know the email probably sounds crazy, but I swear it's legitimate. Can you talk for a few minutes? For the next hour, David walked me through exactly what had happened. Google's acquisition team had been tasked with finding external solutions to specific technical challenges the company was facing. They developed sophisticated algorithms to scan public code repositories, looking for implementations that solved problems their internal teams were struggling with. Family Sync had triggered multiple alerts because the core scheduling algorithm addressed pain points that Google's Family Services division had been trying to solve for over 18 months. More importantly, my approach was fundamentally different from anything they'd tried internally. Where their teams had focused on brute force computational solutions, I'd built something more elegant, a system that learned from family dynamics and adapted its recommendations based on real human behavior patterns. The acquisition team spent 2 weeks testing your code against our internal benchmarks, David explained. Your system consistently outperformed our best solutions by 30 to 40%. They brought in external consultants to verify the results, ran security audits, checked for potential patent conflicts. Everything came back clean, and more importantly, everything worked exactly as advertised. By the time we hung up, I had DocuSign links for preliminary legal documents, and a promise that Google's legal team would call me first thing Monday morning to begin formal negotiations. David assured me this was standard procedure for intellectual property acquisitions of this magnitude, and that if I had any concerns about the process, I should absolutely consult with my own attorney. I sat in my home office until sunrise staring at the GitHub repository I'd created 3 years earlier. The code that had helped me survive one of the darkest periods of my life, the late-night programming sessions that had given me a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic, had somehow evolved into the foundation of a life-changing opportunity. The irony was overwhelming. Patricia had spent years dismissing my work as playing with computers, mocking my career choices while positioning herself as the family's only serious professional. She'd leveraged her legal expertise and Marcus's medical career to claim authority over family decisions, including who deserved access to shared family resources. Now the hobby programming she'd ridiculed for nearly a decade had generated more wealth than she and Marcus had likely accumulated in their entire careers combined. When Emma and Sophie came downstairs for breakfast that morning, they found me still sitting at my laptop, but instead of the usual tiredness that came with late-night client work, they saw something different in my expression. "Dad, you look happy," Sophie observed with the directness that 8-year-olds possess in abundance. "I am happy," I told her, closing the laptop and focusing entirely on my daughters. "And I think things are about to get very interesting around here." I didn't tell them about the Google acquisition that morning. The legal process would take weeks to finalize, and I'd learned from experience not to make promises to my children until I was absolutely certain I could keep them. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine possibilities that had seemed impossibly out of reach just 24 hours earlier. The phone call with Google's legal team the following Monday confirmed everything David had outlined. The acquisition was real, the terms were exactly as described, and if I was willing to move forward, we could have contracts signed and money transferred within 30 days. That afternoon, I found myself thinking about Patricia's dismissive comments at the coffee shop, about my mother's gentle but consistent exclusions, about 8 years of being treated as the family's well-meaning but ultimately unsuccessful member. By the time I signed the final documents 3 weeks later, I knew exactly how I wanted to use this unexpected windfall. It wasn't about revenge exactly, though I'd be lying if I said the irony wasn't satisfying. It was about creating something that no one in my family could ignore, dismiss, or exclude us from. It was about building a place where there would always be room. The Google acquisition finalized on a Thursday morning in late April, and by Friday afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Hannah Rodriguez, one of the most successful luxury real estate agents on the Eastern Seaboard. Her Manhattan office overlooked Central Park, and her client list included celebrities, tech executives, and old money families who collected properties like other people collected art. I'd found Hannah through a referral from Google's legal team, who assured me she specialized in high net worth acquisitions and could be trusted with confidential transactions. When I'd called to schedule our meeting, I'd been deliberately vague about my budget and objectives, explaining only that I was interested in premium vacation properties along the Atlantic coast. Most of my clients start with something modest, Hannah said as she poured coffee from an expensive-looking machine in her office corner. A nice beach house in the Hamptons, maybe something in Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket. We can work up to larger properties as your portfolio develops. I appreciated her measured approach, but I had something very specific in mind. Actually, Hannah, I'm thinking bigger, much bigger. I want to look at resort properties, something that could accommodate extended family gatherings and potentially generate revenue as a luxury vacation destination. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained professionally neutral. Resort properties are a significant investment, typically starting around $8 to $10 million for anything worthwhile. May I ask what kind of budget range you're considering? Money isn't the primary constraint, I said carefully. I'm more interested in finding the right property, something truly special that would make a statement about family hospitality and inclusion. Hannah's entire demeanor shifted as she realized she was dealing with a serious buyer rather than someone fishing for information about luxury markets. She opened her laptop and began pulling up exclusive listings that weren't available through traditional real estate platforms. Let me show you some exceptional properties that might match what you're describing, she said, turning the screen so we could both see the listings. We'll start along the Delaware and Maryland coast, since you mentioned wanting something accessible from your current location. For the next 2 hours, Hannah walked me through an impressive collection of luxury properties. There was a restored Victorian mansion in Cape Henlopen, with 12 bedrooms and panoramic ocean views priced at $6.5 million. A modern architectural masterpiece in Ocean City featured minimalist design and cost $8.2 million. Each property was beautiful, well-appointed, and completely capable of solving my immediate need for family vacation space. But none of them felt right. They were expensive houses, not statements. They would certainly accommodate my daughters and provide a level of luxury that would impress my family, but they wouldn't fundamentally change the power dynamics that had defined our relationships for so many years. There is one other option, Hannah said, after we'd exhausted the local market listings. It's significantly more expensive, and in a different category entirely, but based on our conversation, it might be exactly what you're looking for. She pulled up a new listing that made me catch my breath. Ocean's Edge Resort in Montauk, New York, was unlike anything we'd looked at previously. The property featured 12 luxury suites, arranged across 3 buildings each, with panoramic Atlantic Ocean views and private balconies. The main building housed a full-service spa gourmet restaurant and conference facilities that could accommodate up to 50 guests for private events. The grounds included 50 acres of pristine beachfront property, infinity pools that seemed to merge with the horizon tennis courts, a private marina, and walking trails that wound through carefully maintained coastal gardens. Every detail had been designed for guests who expected perfection: imported Italian marble in the bathrooms, custom furniture crafted by renowned designers, and technology systems that anticipated needs before they were expressed. The current owner is William Blackstone, Hannah explained. He built Ocean's Edge as his family's private retreat, but financial difficulties have forced him to consider selling. The property has been appraised at $16 million, but he might accept offers in the $14 million range for a quick, clean transaction. I studied the photographs and property specifications, while Hannah outlined the operational details. Ocean's Edge had been designed to function either as a private family compound or as an ultra-luxury resort. The infrastructure was already in place for both options: a full kitchen staff that could cater intimate family dinners or elaborate events, housekeeping services that maintained hotel-quality standards, and concierge staff capable of arranging everything from private yacht charters to helicopter tours of Long Island. "This is perfect," I said, though I was thinking about more than just the property's obvious appeal. "Can you tell me more about Blackstone's financial situation? Why is he selling?" Hannah's expression became more guarded. "Client confidentiality prevents me from sharing details, but I can tell you that the sale is motivated by business restructuring rather than any problems with the property itself. Blackstone invested heavily in recent renovations, so you'd be acquiring something essentially new at a significant discount to replacement cost." I made a note to research Blackstone and his business connections, though I suspected I already knew where this story was heading. The timeline of his financial difficulties coincided perfectly with Patricia's recent bragging about her biggest client cases, and Montauk was exactly the kind of prestige location that would appeal to her law firm's corporate clientele. "I'd like to schedule a property inspection as soon as possible," I told Hannah. "If everything looks as good as these photos suggest, I'm prepared to make a cash offer." Hannah's professional composure cracked slightly. "A cash offer? For the full asking price?" "Potentially, yes. I'll need to see the property first, but if the inspection confirms the quality of construction and the operational systems are as sophisticated as described, then money won't be the deciding factor." For the first time in our meeting, Hannah looked genuinely excited rather than politely interested. "I can arrange an inspection for Monday morning. The property is currently unoccupied, so we'll have complete access to tour everything at our own pace." As I drove home from Manhattan that afternoon, I found myself thinking about Patricia's reaction when she inevitably learned about this purchase. She'd recognize the Ocean's Edge name immediately, understand the financial magnitude of the acquisition, and realize that her hobby programmer brother had somehow acquired the crown jewel property that represented everything she'd ever aspired to own. But more than that, I was thinking about Emma and Sophie, and how their faces would light up when they saw the private beach, the pool complex, and the endless possibilities for family adventures. For 8 years, they'd been told there wasn't room for them in their own family's vacation plans. Now, they'd have a place where there was room for everyone, with enough space left over to host the entire extended family multiple times throughout the summer. The irony was too perfect to ignore, but the real satisfaction would come from watching my daughters experience the kind of family vacation they'd always deserved. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear with that particular quality of light that makes the Atlantic coast look like a postcard advertisement for the American dream. Hannah met me at Ocean's Edge Resort's main entrance, where wrought iron gates opened onto a cobblestone driveway that curved through landscaped grounds before reaching the central building's circular drive. William Blackstone himself greeted us at the front entrance, and I immediately understood why Patricia's law firm had been so eager to represent his business interests. He carried himself with the kind of casual confidence that comes from generational wealth, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blazer over khakis that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine, and his obvious distress about selling the property made him seem almost tragically noble. "I appreciate you taking the time to view Ocean's Edge properly," he said as he led us through the main lobby. "Most buyers want to rush through inspections, but this property deserves to be understood slowly. My family spent 5 years creating something truly special here, and I want to make sure it goes to someone who will appreciate what we've built." The tour that followed exceeded every expectation I developed from Hannah's listing materials. The main building's lobby featured 20-foot ceilings, with exposed beams crafted from reclaimed ship timbers, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed unobstructed ocean views, and a stone fireplace large enough to heat a small house. Custom furniture had been arranged in conversation clusters that encouraged both intimate family gatherings and larger social events. Each of the 12 guest suites was essentially a luxury apartment with separate sitting areas, marble bathrooms larger than most people's bedrooms, and private balconies furnished with weathered teak furniture that looked like it belonged in a 5-star European resort. The kitchenettes were stocked with high-end appliances and custom cabinetry, while the master bedrooms featured king-sized beds that faced floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. The spa facility included massage rooms, a sauna, a steam room, and a meditation garden that had been designed by the same landscape architect who'd worked on the High Line in Manhattan. The restaurant kitchen was equipped for serious culinary operations, with commercial-grade equipment that could support everything from intimate family dinners to catered events for 50 guests. But the outdoor spaces were what truly set Ocean's Edge apart from anything else I'd seen. The infinity pool complex included a main pool that seemed to flow directly into the ocean, a separate children's area with water features that would delight kids of any age, and an adults-only section with underwater seating and a swim-up bar. The private beach stretched for nearly half a mile in both directions, accessible through a series of wooden walkways that protected the dune ecosystem, while providing easy access to pristine sand and surf. "We host about 40 families per year," Blackstone explained as we walked along the beach. "Mostly friends and business associates who appreciate discretion and exceptional service. The staff includes a full-time chef housekeeping team, grounds crew, and concierge services that can arrange anything from private yacht charters to helicopter tours of Long Island wine country." I was taking mental notes about operational costs and staffing requirements when Blackstone's attorney, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, joined our group near the main pool. He introduced himself as Jonathan Miller and seemed surprised when I mentioned that my own legal representation would be handling the purchase documentation. Most buyers at this level prefer to work directly with my office for efficiency. Miller said, his tone suggesting mild offense at my independence. "I appreciate the offer," I replied, "but my attorney James Patterson has handled several similar acquisitions and prefers to maintain direct control over the documentation process." What I didn't mention was that Patterson specialized in high-profile acquisitions for tech entrepreneurs, and that Google's legal team had specifically recommended him for complex real estate transactions involving newly liquid startup founders. The conversation that followed revealed details about Blackstone's situation that Hannah had been too discreet to share directly. Ocean's Edge had been designed as the centerpiece of a larger hospitality investment strategy, but regulatory challenges and unexpected legal expenses had consumed more capital than anticipated. Blackstone needed a quick, clean sale to resolve creditor pressures and preserve his other business interests. "The property has been appraised at $16 million, Miller explained, "but Mr. Blackstone is motivated to complete a transaction within 30 days. For the right buyer, we could consider offers in the $14 million range." I appreciated Blackstone's directness about his financial pressures, but I was more interested in understanding the legal complications that had created his cash flow crisis. When I asked about the regulatory challenges he'd mentioned, Miller's expression became noticeably more guarded. Zoning and environmental compliance issues, he said vaguely. Nothing that affects the property's operational status, but the legal expenses have been significant. Something about Miller's evasiveness triggered my curiosity, and during a break in the tour, I discreetly asked Hannah about the legal representation history for Ocean's Edge. Her research revealed a detail that made everything click into place until 6 months ago. Blackstone's primary legal representation had been Morrison Hartwell and Associates Patricia's law firm. The timeline was perfect. Patricia had been bragging about her major league client work for the past year, specifically mentioning hospitality and real estate projects that represented her firm's biggest revenue streams. Blackstone's financial difficulties coincided exactly with Patricia's recent boasts about complex regulatory negotiations and high-stakes business restructuring. When we returned to the main building for final discussions, I decided to test my theory about the legal connection. Jonathan, can you tell me more about the previous legal representation for this project? I want to make sure I understand any potential ongoing complications before we move forward with an offer. Miller's discomfort became immediately obvious. The previous firm experienced some internal restructuring that made it difficult to maintain continuity on complex matters. We've transitioned to new representation to ensure proper focus on resolving outstanding issues. Internal restructuring, I repeated slowly. Would that be Morrison Hartwell and Associates? The color drained from Miller's face. How did you know that? I smiled, but didn't answer directly. Instead, I turned to Blackstone and made my decision. William, I'd like to make a cash offer of $13.5 million with closing scheduled for within 30 days. No financing contingencies, no inspection period beyond what we've completed today, and no requirements for seller warranties beyond standard title insurance. Blackstone looked genuinely relieved while Miller appeared stunned by both the offer amount and the speed of my decision-making process. That's a very generous offer, Blackstone said, and the terms are exactly what we need to move forward efficiently. I accept. We shook hands overlooking the infinity pool with the Atlantic Ocean stretching to the horizon beyond. As Miller began outlining the documentation timeline, I found myself thinking about Patricia's expression when she learned that her computer hobby brother now owned the crown jewel property that her law firm had been unable to preserve for their biggest client. The legal complications that had destroyed Patricia's professional relationship with Blackstone were about to become the foundation for my family's new chapter. Sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected packages. Closing day arrived exactly 28 days later, on a humid Thursday morning in Manhattan. The conference room at Patterson and Associates overlooked the East River, and the assembled group read like a masterclass in high-stakes real estate transactions. My attorney, James Patterson, Blackstone's new legal team, a representative from the title insurance company, and a notary who specialized in 8-figure property transfers. I arrived carrying a certified bank check for $13.5 million, an amount that still felt surreal, despite having rehearsed this moment multiple times in my head. The Google acquisition money had been sitting in a high-yield money market account for over a month earning interest, while I planned exactly how to deploy it for maximum impact on my family's future. Blackstone appeared genuinely relieved as we worked through the final documentation. The property inspection had revealed everything to be exactly as advertised: immaculate construction, state-of-the-art systems, and operational infrastructure that could support either private family use or commercial resort operations without any additional investment. I have to say, Scott, Blackstone remarked as we signed the final transfer documents, this has been one of the most straightforward transactions I've ever experienced. No last-minute complications, no renegotiation attempts, no financing delays. In today's market, that kind of certainty is worth more than you might realize. Patterson guided me through the closing checklist with the efficiency of someone who'd handled dozens of similar acquisitions. Property deed, title insurance, utility transfers, staff contract assignments, and operational permits all transferred smoothly to my ownership. By noon, I was holding keys to a 50-acre oceanfront resort that represented more luxury than I'd ever imagined owning. But the most interesting moment came during what should have been routine paperwork review. Blackstone's new attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Walsh, mentioned an unexpected development that had occurred just the week prior. "Mr. Blackstone, I should probably mention that Morrison Hartwell and Associates filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection last Tuesday. Their failure to properly manage your regulatory compliance issues contributed to the firm's collapse, along with several other major client defaults." I kept my expression neutral, but internally, I felt like I'd just solved a complex puzzle. Patricia's law firm had imploded exactly as I'd suspected, and their biggest client's distress sale was now funding my acquisition of the very property they'd failed to protect. Bankruptcy. Blackstone asked, his tone mixing surprise with vindication. I knew they'd made serious mistakes with our zoning applications, but I didn't realize the problems were firm-wide. Walsh nodded grimly. According to the bankruptcy filings, Morrison Hartwell lost 3 major clients within 60 days due to missed deadlines and inadequate preparation for regulatory proceedings. The partners are facing potential malpractice suits, and the firm's assets are being liquidated to satisfy creditor claims. Patterson caught my eye and raised an eyebrow slightly, recognizing that this information was more than casually interesting to me. I'd briefed him on my family dynamics and the motivation behind purchasing Ocean's Edge, so he understood the personal significance of Patricia's professional downfall. "That's unfortunate for everyone involved," I said carefully. "Legal malpractice cases can be devastating for both clients and attorneys." "Indeed," Walsh agreed, "particularly for the individual partners. Patricia Morrison, the lead partner on Mr. Blackstone's account, apparently faces personal financial liability that extends beyond the firm's bankruptcy protection." The ceremony concluded with the traditional key transfer, a moment that felt both ceremonial and deeply symbolic. As Blackstone handed me the ornate keyring that included access to every building gate and storage area on the property, I thought about the chain of events that had brought us to this point. Patricia's professional arrogance and inadequate attention to detail had created the very opportunity that now placed me in possession of a luxury resort worth more than she'd likely earn in her entire career. I drove directly from Manhattan to Ocean's Edge, wanting to experience the property as an owner rather than a prospective buyer. The afternoon sun was perfect, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds and turning the ocean into a canvas of deep blues and shifting gold highlights. Emma and Sophie were spending the day with Jennifer, so I had the entire resort to myself for the first time. Walking through the empty suites, I began planning how to transform Ocean's Edge from a commercial operation into a family destination that could accommodate not just my daughters, but potentially every member of our extended family who'd ever made us feel unwelcome or excluded. The irony was perfect. The property that Patricia's legal mistakes had forced into distress sale would become the setting for family gatherings that included everyone, regardless of past conflicts or perceived social status. But my moment of solitary reflection was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. As I stood on the main building's deck, admiring the view and planning summer logistics, I heard a car in the main driveway. Through the windows, I could see a familiar figure walking toward the entrance, my mother Dorothy, looking more agitated than I'd seen her in years. She knocked on the door with the kind of urgent persistence that suggested she'd driven here directly from Delaware, a 3-hour trip that she rarely made without advance planning. When I opened the door, her expression mixed desperation with embarrassment in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Scott, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "I know this might seem strange showing up here unannounced, but I didn't know where else to turn." I invited her inside, offering coffee and trying to process why my mother had somehow tracked me to Ocean's Edge on the same day I'd closed on the property. The timing seemed too coincidental to be accidental. "How did you know I was here?" I asked, as we settled in the main lobby's comfortable seating area. Dorothy's answer revealed the depth of my family's interconnected financial problems. "Patricia told me." She's been following the bankruptcy proceedings for her law firm, and when she saw the final sale documents for this property, she recognized your name as the buyer. The revelation that Patricia already knew about my acquisition was surprising, but Dorothy's obvious distress suggested there were additional complications I hadn't anticipated. "Mom, what's going on? Why did you drive all the way to Montauk to find me?" Her answer transformed everything I thought I understood about my family's financial dynamics and the real motivation behind 8 years of coordinated exclusion from beach house vacations. Dorothy's hands shook slightly as she reached into her purse for a tissue, and when she looked up at me, I saw something I'd never witnessed before. My mother, who had always been the calm center of our family's chaos, looked genuinely frightened. "Scott, I made a terrible mistake 6 months ago, and now I don't know how to fix it." She began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I took an equity loan against the beach house to help Patricia with what she called temporary cash flow problems for her law firm. $50,000 that she promised to repay within 90 days, once her big client case was resolved." The pieces started falling into place with horrible clarity. "Her big client case," I repeated. "That would be Blackstone Hospitality Group." Dorothy nodded miserably. She said it was the biggest opportunity of her career, that the legal fees alone would set her firm up for years. She explained how complex commercial real estate law was, how much expertise was required, how this case would establish Morrison Hartwell as a major player in hospitality law. And now the bank is demanding immediate payment. Patricia's firm declared bankruptcy, the Blackstone case collapsed, and she filed personal bankruptcy protection last week. The $50,000 is gone, and I have 60 days to pay off the equity loan or lose the beach house entirely. I sat in stunned silence, processing the full scope of what Dorothy had revealed. The beach house that had been the symbol of my exclusion, the property that Patricia had guarded so jealously for 8 years, was about to be lost because of her own financial mismanagement and professional incompetence. "Mom," I said carefully, "do you understand what Patricia actually did to Blackstone's case? Why the legal representation failed so badly?" Dorothy shook her head. "She won't explain the details. She just says there were unexpected complications with zoning regulations and that the client had unrealistic expectations about timeline and outcomes." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the sound of another car in the driveway. Through the window, I could see Patricia herself, climbing out of a black BMW that looked like it had seen better days. She moved with the kind of aggressive purpose that suggested she was prepared for confrontation rather than conversation. "I told Patricia I was coming to talk with you," Dorothy said apologetically. "I hoped she might wait at home, but apparently she decided to follow me." Patricia entered without knocking, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something harder and more desperate. Her business attire was impeccable as always, but there was an edge to her presentation that suggested someone fighting to maintain appearances while everything collapsed around her. "Hello, Scott," she said, surveying the luxury resort lobby with obvious calculation. "Impressive place you've got here. I had no idea freelance programming paid so well these days." "Patricia," I replied evenly. "Mom was just explaining the situation with the beach house equity loan." Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine alarm, before being replaced by her familiar dismissive expression. "Mom tends to dramatize financial situations. It's a temporary setback that we're managing through proper legal channels." "Proper legal channels," I repeated. "Like the ones you use to manage Blackstone's regulatory compliance?" The direct confrontation caught Patricia off guard, and for the first time in our adult relationship, I saw her struggle to maintain control of a conversation. "I don't know what Blackstone might have told you," she said, "but complex commercial cases sometimes involve complications that are beyond any individual attorney's control. Market conditions, regulatory changes, client expectations. There are variables that even the most skilled legal representation cannot anticipate." Dorothy looked back and forth between us, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. "Patricia, What is Scott talking about? What happened with your client case? Before Patricia could craft another evasion, I decided to cut through the carefully constructed fiction she'd been maintaining. Mom Patricia's law firm failed to file critical zoning applications within required deadlines for Blackstone's resort operations. The missed deadlines triggered regulatory reviews that cost Blackstone millions in delays and penalties. When Blackstone tried to hold Morrison Hartwell accountable for the mistakes, Patricia's firm couldn't afford the liability and collapsed into bankruptcy. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. That's a gross oversimplification of an extremely complex situation. The zoning requirements changed during the application process, and our clients failed to provide critical information within the timelines we established. Which clients? I asked. The same clients whose property I just purchased at a distress sale because your mistakes destroyed their business model. The silence that followed was deafening. Dorothy stared at Patricia with growing understanding, while Patricia processed the full implications of my revelation. You bought Ocean's Edge Resort, Patricia asked, her voice hollow. $13.5 million cash closed this morning. I confirmed. William Blackstone was very motivated to complete a quick sale after the legal complications your firm created for his operations. Dorothy gasped. Scott, $13.5 million. How is that possible? Google acquired software I developed. I explained simply. Software that solved problems their engineering teams couldn't figure out. Turns out my computer hobby was worth $12 million to one of the world's most valuable companies. Patricia sank into one of the lobby's leather chairs, her usual commanding presence completely deflated. $12 million, she repeated mechanically. Actually, it was $12 million for the intellectual property rights, plus a 2-year consulting contract. But who's counting? For several minutes, none of us spoke. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting dust motes that danced in the air like tiny celebrations of irony. My mother sat processing 8 years of family dynamics that had been based on completely false assumptions about relative success and financial stability. Patricia stared at her hands, confronting the reality that the brother she'd spent years dismissing as financially unstable now possessed more wealth than she'd ever imagined. Finally, Dorothy broke the silence. Scott, I know I have no right to ask this, after all the years we excluded you and the girls. But is there any way you might consider helping with the beach house situation? Her question hung in the air like a challenge to everything our family had become over the past 8 years. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for, since that first rejection phone call, the opportunity to either perpetuate the cycle of exclusion and resentment, or choose a different path entirely. Patricia looked up at me with something that might have been hope, though it was mixed with enough pride and stubbornness to suggest she hadn't fully processed the magnitude of her mistakes or their impact on our family relationships. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the infinity pool and the Atlantic Ocean beyond, thinking about Emma and Sophie, about the promises I'd made to them, and about what kind of man I wanted them to see me become in this moment. When I turned back to face my mother and sister, I knew exactly what I was going to say. I have a proposition for both of you. I said, my voice calm, but carrying the weight of 8 years of accumulated hurt and newfound clarity. But before we discuss solutions, Patricia, there's something you need to understand about what you actually did to this family. I walked back to the seating area, choosing to stand rather than sit, needing the psychological advantage of height for what I was about to say. For 8 years, you convinced our mother that my children weren't worthy of the same family considerations as yours. You systematically excluded Emma and Sophie from beach house visits, family planning discussions, and even group communications. You dismissed my career with condescension and arrogance, never bothering to understand what I actually did or how successful it had become. Patricia started to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You leveraged your legal credentials and Marcus's medical career to position yourself as the family's authority on who deserved what. You convinced Mom to mortgage her home to fund your professional ambitions, then failed so spectacularly that you've now put her entire retirement security at risk. Dorothy winced at the bluntness of my summary, but didn't contradict any of the facts. The property we're sitting in right now, I continued, represents the crown jewel of your biggest client's business empire. Ocean's Edge Resort was supposed to be the foundation of Blackstone's hospitality expansion, the project that would cement your law firm's reputation in commercial real estate. Instead, your mistakes forced him into a distress sale that I was able to acquire for millions below its actual value. Patricia's face had gone completely pale. Scott, I understand you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I'm not angry anymore. I interrupted gently. I'm sad. I'm sad that it took financial catastrophe for our family to have an honest conversation about respect and inclusion. I'm sad that my daughters spent their childhood believing their grandmother didn't want them around. And I'm sad that you wasted so many years dismissing the very skills and work ethic that could have helped all of us if you'd been willing to see them clearly. The room fell silent, except for the sound of waves hitting the beach below. Through the windows, I could see the outdoor staff preparing the pool area for what would normally be evening guests, though Ocean's Edge was currently empty, pending my decisions about operational changes. Now, I said, settling into the chair across from Dorothy and Patricia, here's what I'm willing to do. I will pay off the entire equity loan on the beach house, $50,000 plus whatever interest and fees have accumulated. The payment will happen within the next week, so Mom doesn't have to worry about foreclosure. Dorothy started crying with relief while Patricia looked genuinely shocked by my offer. But there are conditions, I continued. The beach house gets transferred into a family trust that guarantees equal access for all grandchildren. No more coordination to exclude certain family members. No more room excuses. Emma and Sophie get the same consideration as Tyler and Brandon, period. Scott, that's more than fair, Dorothy said through her tears. I turned to Patricia. Additionally, you will publicly acknowledge to Emma and Sophie that your past treatment was wrong, and you will apologize for the years of dismissal and exclusion. Not because I'm demanding it as a condition of helping Mom, but because it's the right thing to do, and because they deserve to hear it from you directly. Patricia nodded slowly, her usual defiance replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. Finally, I said, I want you both to understand what Ocean's Edge Resort represents for our family's future. This property has 48 luxury suites and can accommodate extended family gatherings for up to 100 guests. Starting this summer, every member of our extended family gets 1 week here annually, completely free. That includes Tyler and Brandon. It includes Marcus, and it even includes Jennifer when the girls want both parents present for special occasions. I stood again and walked to the window, looking out at the private beach, where I could already imagine Emma and Sophie building sandcastles with their cousins. There's room for everyone, I said, letting the words carry the full weight of their symbolic meaning. There's room for family dinners, where nobody gets excluded from the planning. There's room for holiday gatherings, where children don't have to wonder why some families are welcome and others aren't. There's room for healing if we're all willing to do the work. Patricia spoke for the first time in several minutes. Scott, I need you to know that I was wrong. About your career, about your priorities, about what success actually means. I let my own insecurities and competitive nature poison our family relationships, and I'm genuinely sorry for the pain I caused you and the girls. Her apology sounded sincere, though I suspected it would take time for the full implications of our changed family dynamics to sink in completely. And Mom, I said, turning to Dorothy, I need you to understand that Emma and Sophie are not consolation prizes or secondary considerations. They're your granddaughters. They love you unconditionally, and they deserve to feel wanted and included in their own family. Dorothy nodded emphatically. I know, sweetheart. I've known it for years, but I let Patricia convince me that keeping peace between my children was more important than fairness to my grandchildren. That was wrong. And I'll spend whatever time I have left making it up to Emma and Sophie. 6 months later, I stood on the same deck where we'd had that difficult conversation, but the scene below was completely transformed. Emma and Sophie were building an elaborate sand fortress with their cousins Tyler and Brandon, who had surprised everyone by becoming genuinely enthusiastic about their role as big brothers to their younger cousins. Jennifer was reading a book nearby occasionally, looking up to smile at me, in a way that suggested our co-parenting relationship had found a new equilibrium based on mutual respect, rather than lingering resentment. Dorothy sat at a patio table with Marcus, both of them watching the kids play, while sharing grandparent stories and comparing notes about teenage behavior patterns. Her relief about the beach house situation had evolved into genuine joy about having regular access to all 4 grandchildren in a setting that encouraged natural relationship building. Patricia approached me as I was setting up the evening barbecue, carrying 2 bottles of craft beer, and wearing casual clothes I'd never seen her in before. "Scott, can we talk for a minute?" "Of course," I said, accepting the beer and gesturing to chairs that faced the ocean. "I've been thinking about everything that happened this year," she began, "and I realize I owe you more than apologies. I owe you recognition for who you actually are and what you've accomplished, not just with Google in this place, but as a father and as someone who chose inclusion over revenge when you had every right to shut us all out." I appreciated her words, though I'd moved beyond needing validation from Patricia about my choices or achievements. "The girls love it here," I said instead. "That's what matters most to me." "They do," she agreed, watching Emma demonstrate proper sandcastle engineering to Brandon, who was listening with the kind of attention that suggested genuine interest rather than obligatory patience. "And Tyler keeps asking when we're coming back next summer. I think this place has given all of our kids something they didn't know they were missing." "Room to be a real family," I said. Patricia smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked completely natural. "Room to be a real family," she agreed. As the sun set over the Atlantic painting, the sky in shades of orange and pink that reflected perfectly in the infinity pool, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The pain of exclusion had been real. The family dynamics had been genuinely toxic, and the financial success that made Ocean's Edge possible had been completely unexpected. But the most important transformation had been internal, choosing to build something inclusive rather than exclusive, choosing healing over revenge, choosing to create room for everyone rather than using my newfound power to perpetuate the cycle of exclusion that had defined our family for too long. Jennifer joined me on the deck as I was finishing the barbecue preparation. "The girls keep asking if we can stay an extra day," she said. "I think they're afraid this is all too good to be true and might disappear if we leave." "It's not going anywhere," I assured her. "This is their place now, just as much as it's mine. They'll always have room here, no matter what changes in any of our lives." Emma ran up to us, sandy and sunburned and radiating the kind of happiness that only comes from feeling completely secure and welcomed. "Dad Brandon taught me how to surf, and Tyler says he'll show me the tide pools tomorrow morning before breakfast. Can we really come back every summer?" Every summer, I promised, pulling her close for a hug that smelled like sunscreen and salt water and childhood joy. "And spring break, and any other time you want to visit. This is our family's place now." Sophie joined us, carrying a bucket full of shells she'd collected with Dorothy's patient assistance. "Grandma says she's going to teach me how to make jewelry from these shells," she announced proudly. "And Aunt Patricia says she'll help me start a shell business if I want to sell them to the other families who come here." As I watched my daughters integrate naturally into the extended family gathering I'd created, I realized that the most valuable thing I'd purchased with the Google acquisition money wasn't the resort itself, but the opportunity to model for Emma and Sophie what it looks like when someone has the power to exclude others, but chooses inclusion instead. They would grow up knowing that real strength isn't about keeping people out, but about creating space for everyone to belong. They would understand that success means building bigger tables, not higher walls. And they would always remember that their father, when given the choice between revenge and reconciliation, chose love. The evening ended with all of us gathered around a fire pit on the beach, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories while waves lapped gently at the shore, just a few yards away. Emma fell asleep in my lap, while Sophie curled up against Jennifer's shoulder. Tyler and Brandon were teaching Dorothy how to play guitar, their laughter carrying across the water like a promise that family healing was not only possible, but sustainable. As I carried Emma up to her suite later that night, she mumbled sleepily against my shoulder, "Dad, this is the best family vacation ever." "It is," I agreed, tucking her into bed in a room that overlooked the ocean and would always be hers whenever she needed it. And there will be many more just like it. True wealth, I'd learned, isn't measured by exclusion, but by inclusion. Success isn't about proving you're better than the people who doubted you. It's about creating space for everyone to grow and thrive together. And sometimes the most powerful response to years of being told there isn't room for you is to build a place where there's room for everyone, including the people who taught you that lesson in the first place. Have you ever been in a situation where family members made you feel excluded or unwelcome, but you later had the chance to respond with kindness instead of revenge? I'd love to hear about times when you chose inclusion over exclusion in your own family relationships. Please share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about family healing and personal triumph, and share this with anyone who might need a reminder that there's always room for forgiveness and positive change. Thank you for listening, and remember that the most beautiful families are built on acceptance, inclusion, and the courage to choose love, even when it's difficult.